Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scicomm Monday. I'm your host, Nicole Wood. For those of you who are new to the broadcast and are joining in, we try to make this as engaging a platform as possible. So please feel free to ask us questions or make comments on the integrated chat module here on Periscope. And if you're watching this on replay after the broadcast, please feel free to tweet us at our various handles. You can reach me either at the Scicomm Monday handle or at my personal handle of Wildlife BioGal. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Jason Organ. He's from Indiana University, and he's going to be talking to us about their program with Scicomm with grad students and some of the extracurricular work he's doing outside of the university with some science communication as well. So with that, I want to welcome Jason to the broadcast. Thanks for being on, Jason.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about what we're doing here at IU.
So why don't you give us a little bit of background as to how you got to where you are so everyone just kind of knows where you're coming from with your experiences in science communication.
Sure, thanks. Well, I started, my very first job in high school was actually in improv theater. I had it for a very short amount of time, but it was a lot of fun. And then I decided I wanted to go and make some money. So I decided science might be something that would be a worthwhile venture. And so I started doing science. I fell in love with it. But then during the 2016 election campaign, something sort of clicked for me that there was a huge miscommunication between what scientists are doing and what the public understands us to be doing. And I thought, I might be able to use my talents, having a background in theater with my talents in science, to find a way to bridge that gap. So I started getting involved with the programs that we have here at IU. We are an affiliate, or what used to be called an affiliate. I think that program's sort of in flux now, but we were an affiliate of the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook. And because of that, we have access to curriculum there and training that is above and beyond, or was above and beyond, what the general scientific public could be trained in. And so I was fortunate to be sent there by the university in order to get trained. And at the same time, I met some great colleagues here on campus who were organizing a graduate minor in science communication and asked for me to join the team. And we were able to secure funding for it. And just this past fall, we started teaching our first courses in science communication at the graduate minor level. So now an Indiana University graduate student here on the Indianapolis campus. So that's IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and then the main campus of the medical school, which is here in Indianapolis. Graduate students in those programs are able to earn a graduate minor in communicating science, which is really, I think, an important step in providing a real good service to the public, but also to scientists.
Yeah, so speaking of the minor there that you have, how common is that in American universities to have a science communication program? Because I really haven't heard too many people doing it. So how common is it? Do you know?
I don't know certainly how common it is, but my general sense is that it's pretty uncommon. I think that there has been a push over the last several years to make it more common. But there aren't a lot of scientists at this point who've been trained in effective communication strategies. And so what we're trying to do is teach students not how to give a better presentation with better information or better visuals, but instead to learn how to adapt their message, to reframe their message in order to connect with an audience. And there are ways to do that that we're not commonly taught. For example, reading your visual cues from your audience in real time can help you assess what's going on, and then you can reframe what you're trying to say to connect with an audience. We also use a lot of storytelling because if you tell a story, you can engage an audience, and they're more likely to be listening to you and to understand what you're getting at. So we really try to reframe messages, teach students how to distill their message so that it is in bite-sized pieces of information. We try to teach them to avoid using jargon. And we do this both from a public speaking perspective, but also in a writing perspective.
Yeah, I like that you're doing both formats, because I think sometimes we get so into just, like, say, like I do Periscope, and so we're doing this visual format, but sometimes I think we forget that writing is still a very powerful key to be able to reach people. So what kind of things are you doing with that writing aspect? Are you trying to get them to focus on blogs or writing for public magazines? What aspects of the writing are you really trying to hit on there?
So, good question. And the answer to that is that all of the above is really what we're trying to target. What we're trying to teach students to do is to write for the public, which is very different than writing for the science community. There's a standard way that one would write a science paper, right? Introduction, materials and methods, results, discussion, and everyone's sort of expecting to see that. And it's boring. It's really boring. And on top of that, scientists from different fields can't understand the language of another field. I, as a PhD scientist, should be able to read any science and be able to at least understand the very basics of what is in there. And truth be told, you can thumb through Science magazine or Nature and not understand half of what's in there because it's such technical language. And so what we're trying to do is teach students how to reframe that message to tell a story, right? All of our data have a story associated with them. And finding a way to connect with an audience through storytelling is powerful. And so we're teaching students to write from that perspective. And so to do that, what we're doing is trying to take our applied improvisational theater approaches, like Alan Alda teaches at the Alda Center and that the faculty there as well, and use those kinds of principles in writing. And that's hard to do. You don't have those visual cues with your audience, and so you can't adapt your message in real time like you can if you're speaking. But you can sort of shoot for a happy medium between technical language and non-technical language by doing things like, if you have a piece of jargon you have to define it first before you use it. If you use the word and then you define what it means, you lose an audience. But instead, if you define what it is and then say, okay, that's called such and such, you don't lose the audience. Instead, you maybe pique their curiosity a little more, or you show them that this is a piece of information they're going to need to know, or a word that they're going to need to understand as you move forward, but it's not the central theme of what you're saying, and you don't lose the forest for the trees.
No, I really like that point of explaining what it is that you're going to be talking about. So you're kind of like leading up. You're giving them all that background. You're doing, like you said, more of that story form before you give them that big reveal of that word. That's one thing I really like. I occasionally watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, and she does a very good job of her opening segment. She tells this big background story leading up to that big news story of the day, and it gets you so engaged into what it is that she's going to be talking about that sometimes you forget that she's actually leading up to a news story because it's so engaging, all this background information. So when she finally reveals it, you're like, oh, wow. And so to kind of be able to do that on a very simplified form with just how you're describing a simple word, you're still getting that little bit of, really good storytelling in there for people to be engaged with.
Absolutely. So there's this well-known phenomenon called the story spine. It's sort of this theory behind how good stories are written. And it starts with, a beginning, with, sort of a protagonist moving along through, his or her everyday life. Something happens to change the course of that. There's a climax. And at the end of that climax, something has changed about that protagonist, right? If you can, and all of our favorite movies, right? Every single movie you can remember from your childhood, or even the ones that are really engaging now, they all follow that general arc. And if you can instead adapt your story of science to follow that kind of an arc, you will bring in an audience, you'll engage them. And even if they're not interested in the specifics of what you're doing research-wise, you will still bring them along on this story, and they will walk away with an understanding of the main point you were trying to make. And so we're trying to teach that sort of approach.
Yeah, I mean, the storytelling is a really good way. I mean, think about The Martian. I mean, they made botany really cool and engaging and everything. So maybe we won't go to that level of, big Hollywood movie picture to make, our different research aspects, seem cool and, getting the audience to follow along. But we could still take elements of how you tell a story and get them engaged with those things and teach them the different aspects of our research or the topics that we're trying to cover.
Exactly. So, in every story, there's a winner and there's a loser. There's hardships and there are, easier times. And if you can find a way to harness that energy and redefine or reframe the message of your science to connect with a broader audience, not only will you be better at writing for the public, but ultimately you're going to be better at writing for your science as well, because you can engage scientists from other disciplines, and science is moving increasingly more multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. And so because of that, you have to be able to communicate with your collaborators, with your funders. And if you can do that by telling a story and engaging an audience, I think you're going to be better off all around.
Yeah, you make a good point with being able to communicate across disciplines, because I know even within the discipline of ecology, someone just slightly outside of my field in ecology, I am all of a sudden lost. I mean, I can go to a conference that's specializing in, say, wildlife, and people can be talking about things that I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And it's so easy to do that, much less if you're way outside the field or have nothing to do with science at all. How would you ever understand what it is we're talking about if us within the field don't even understand what each other is talking about?
Exactly.
So just a reminder for everyone out there, we're currently talking with Dr. Jason Organ. He's from Indiana University, and he's talking to us about their program of science communication at IU. And then he also does science communication for the PLOS blog and everything out there, which is really cool. So we're definitely going to get talking about that as well. But just a reminder to, if you've got any questions or comments, please send them in via the integrated chat module here on Periscope, or if you're watching this on replay, you can tweet us either at our handles for me, which would be Scicomm Monday, or at Wildlife BioGal, or for Dr. Jason Organ, it'd be at OregonJM. So Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the response that you've gotten to the program at IU? Is it, are you having a bunch of students sign up, or is it still kind of like new and fresh and people are kind of unsure about jumping into it? Or do you find that, with the current climate of, politics and stuff, are you finding students are really kind of jumping on the bandwagon and wanting to get engaged with Scicomm?
That is a really interesting question, and it's multifaceted. So let me see if I can answer different aspects of this. So to your first point, we've been successful in recruiting our first class. It was smaller than we would have liked, but we had a very strong 10 students take our first course in the minor. I think all of them have signed up for next semester as well. And we are attracting more attention both locally and nationally with our program. Part of our struggle has been that students are very much interested in this, but the principal investigators whose labs they're in are hesitant to pay for this kind of coursework, and the reason being that everyone here at IU has to have a graduate minor, and typically students end up taking a graduate minor that is in biomedical sciences or something like that, right? And so they end up basically using the same kind of coursework that they're already taking for their major, right, their graduate major, and finding a way to either double up or to double down on a topic, right? So they take multiple courses in that. This is outside the box for most people. And so we've had a little bit of trouble attracting the attention of the principal investigators throughout the university. That said, we've had really good luck attracting the attention of the dean's office. So the dean's office is fully supportive of our program. There is an Office of Professional Development and Faculty Affairs that teaches a workshop series that I'm teaching in with my co-conspirators on this graduate minor, and so we are getting faculty to be trained in this three workshop series, but we're having a little more difficulty getting the students into the courses. Now, that said, we have only had one semester of this, so I expect that this is going to continue to take off. And the reason I say that is that in addition to wearing my hat as a professor here and also as the editor of the Scicomm PLOS blog, I'm also on the board of directors of the American Association of Anatomists. And the AAA is one of the members of the Federation of American Societies of Experimental Biology, or FASEB. FASEB recognizes the importance of advocacy. It has for a long time. They have one of the strongest advocacy programs for Hill Day and that sort of stuff, where they take scientists to Capitol Hill and lobby on behalf or advocate on behalf of science funding. In fact, I think they represent something like 31 or 32 different societies. Being on the board of directors of AAA has been a really amazing experience for me. But one of the things that I really appreciated was the fact that here I am, a science communicator, an advocate for science communication. I ran a workshop at the Experimental Biology Conference last year that was sponsored by the AAA, that was actually attended by the president and president-elect of FASEB, which was great. It was so much fun to watch those guys playing improv games from way back in the back of the room. It was fascinating. Without input from me, sort of behind my back, but with my blessing, the American Association of Anatomists has actually spearheaded this effort to become a leader in science communication. So we see it at the PI level on a national level. We see scientists who are really engaged in saying, look, we got to change our message. And the reason we need to change our message is that if the public doesn't understand what we do, then the public isn't going to vote for representatives who are going to fund what we do. And it's not the public's fault that they don't understand what we do. It's our fault because we do a terrible job of telling them what we do. And it's because we use jargon. It's because we talk above their heads and we think they can't understand. But what we're trying to teach our students through our workshop series, through a program that we're starting through the AAA, through our national involvement, running workshops nationally, and also with our affiliation with the Alda Center, is that you can use stories, you can use metaphors. There may be not the most detailed way to tell about your science, but they may be the most effective way. And there's a lot of literature that suggests that you can reach an audience, a broad audience, by finding a level that they can understand and making sure that you're not spewing information at them, but instead you are running a two-way dialogue here, right? So we teach our students and we teach our faculty here that if you make communication about the co-creation of meaning, whereas while you are speaking to an audience, you're not speaking to, instead you're speaking with. And while the audience may be non-verbally communicating with you, they are still communicating. If you can find a way to make that work, you will be able to reach that audience much more than if you were to just spew information.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like sometimes we scientists just kind of spew information out there rather than getting that engagement back and forth. That's why I like platforms here like Periscope and other social media where you can kind of get that back and forth conversation going with various audiences. What are some other good ways that you know of engaging with people besides just social media when you're out there trying to get your message across, but create that conversation so you get that full-on engagement?
Right, that's a really good question. So a lot of people are concerned, and maybe rightfully so, that if they engage on social media, it's going to hurt their credibility as a scientist. This is a pretty well-known complaint, especially among the more senior scientists. I don't want to get out there and do this because then I'm going to lose my credibility as a scientist. Instead, I'm going to stick to my science. That probably couldn't be further from the truth. So what I would say is, we're all expert in something. Most of us are engaged enough that we're reading the newspaper, we're listening to the media, and all of us can find something that is misrepresented. It may not be in our particular research area. It may not be even the most important thing in the world, but accuracy and truth is important. And so I would encourage those of us who are struggling with the idea or worried about perhaps engaging on social media to instead focus on writing letters to the editors of your newspaper. If you find even just a small piece of information in a story that isn't scientifically accurate, you can use that you can correct that in a short letter, and then you can use that to pivot to a bigger picture question. And you can advocate for the importance of science funding or science education. There are ways to engage the public that don't involve strictly outreach activities. And so I think that's kind of getting at what you were asking.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea of the letters to the editor. I think sometimes we forget one of those, more mass media types, because we're so into social media and always being on our phones and always engaging with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all these other great things that sometimes we forget a lot of the audience that we are really needing to cater to so that way they understand science might not necessarily be on those channels and might not hear the message otherwise. So things like letters to the editor that say certain audiences are going to be more attuned in, that's the way to reach them, and we still have to incorporate those into our outreach programs.
Exactly. Exactly. But another way to do it is also by blogging, right? So one of the things that we do at Scicomm Plus is we invite experts to write about a particular phenomenon that's in the media and to either debunk or support what's being said with actual scientific approaches, right? And so a good example of that was that Google Manifesto. I hate to use that term because Google didn't write it, but everyone knows it colloquially as the Google Manifesto, that was just full of really bad evolutionary biology. And so we invited an evolutionary biologist, an anthropologist at Notre Dame, to contribute a piece. He's well known. He writes for Psychology Today all the time, so he's well versed in evolutionary psychology. We asked him to take apart the arguments in this manifesto and show where the science was wrong. And that really struck a chord. We were able to generate a whole bunch of page views for something that took this author maybe half a day to write. So a couple of hours, and then me a couple of hours of editing and going back and forth. And we were able to communicate a message that I think was effective.
Yeah, how big and how impactful do you feel like the PLOS blog is? Is it something that you're really able to generate a lot of interest in? Do you find that it's an effective tool with communicating not only to scientists but maybe the general audiences as well, maybe those non-science audiences that you're getting to pull in and read the articles?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure we have an answer to that yet. We took over at the end of June, so me and two other collaborators here at Indiana University, and we took over in June, and since then we've generated close to, I think, 70,000 page views, which is impressive, considering that they hadn't had 70,000 page views in the 6 months earlier in the year, or even, I think, the year before that altogether. Part of that is because we put a lot of content out there. So even though we're not getting things read as much as we would like, we are getting lots of things read, right? Lots of different individual things read. Maybe not a whole bunch of reads on one particular entry. My concern or my worry is that we're really in an echo chamber at this point. We're just speaking to scientists because most of the public doesn't know about the public library of science. Or if they do, they don't recognize or don't realize that that is meant really for them to be able to engage with scientific discourse. The problem is most papers written in PLOS journals are written like science papers, right? They're not written for the public, and so the public can't understand them. I can't understand them, right? And so that makes it hard to communicate what's going on in there. And I would expect people can't understand what I write either. I would hope that that's changing after I've reframed the way I think about communicating science. But there's only one way to find out, and that is to see how things progress. So for the time being, I think we are reaching scientists more than we're reaching the general public, but our desire really is to reach the general public. And so what we've been using is Facebook and Twitter to really push traffic to the PLOS blog, writing about things that are important in popular culture. So for example, we had a scientist from Mississippi State write us an entry on her work on the immunosuppression effects of marijuana. And so she's been doing a lot of work on that. And I thought, this would be something that the general public would find interesting, right? Because on the one hand, if you're suppressing your immune system, that's not good if you have a cold, right? It's going to take you longer to fight off that cold. However, if you have a disease that would require immunosuppression, right, like muscular dystrophy or something like that, where you have an overactive immune system, if you can suppress it, if you can tamp it down, it might actually represent a medicinal value for that. And so knowing where that sort of sweet spot is in between doing harm but maybe also doing good, I think the general public needs to be aware of. So we try to find these kinds of things to report on, and hopefully because we're doing that, I hope we're reaching a broader audience. Only time will tell.
Yeah, it's exciting as you're trying to build things and make it something bigger, where you're reaching different things and you're just basically kind of feeling your way around, trying to see what's going to stick and what doesn't. And sometimes it's luck of the draw of what articles actually hit people. If you put it out at 4 o'clock, but if you'd put it out at 4:02, maybe you're going to totally miss your whole audience, or which platforms you're trying to get people to channel in through to the blogs. if anyone can figure that out, if you ever get that figured out, the magical formula for that, let us all know.
I was hoping you could do that for me.
I'm trying. I feel every time like I've got it figured out, something else totally gets thrown in. It's just like it all goes to, well, there goes that theory.
Understood.
So just a reminder to everyone out there, we're currently speaking with Dr. Jason Organ. He's from IU, so Indiana University. He's talking to us about the Scicomm program that they have there at IU for grad students, and also his work with the PLOS blog out on there. So if you're really into a lot of cool articles and stuff, definitely go check that out. And if you got any questions or comments for us, please feel free to ask us in the integrated chat module here on Periscope, or if you're watching this on replay, feel free to tweet us. You could reach me either at Scicomm Monday or at my personal handle of Wildlife BioGal, and you can reach Jason at his handle of at OregonJM. So Jason, you were talking to us really early on about improv.
Sure.
How do you feel like improv has really helped you in your science communication?
Really good question. And I think the answer to that lies in the sort of general pillars of applied improvisational theater. The number one being this concept of yes and. So in the improv world, in the improv theater world, when you are improvising a scene, the idea that that there is a definitive reality has to be sort of bought into by everyone. And so this concept of yes and means that if your partner says, hey, here's a flask of whiskey, you cannot deny its existence. You have to accept its existence. Now, whether you choose to drink that, whether you choose to knock it out of your partner's hand, whether you choose to dump it out on the floor, whether you choose to force it down your partner's throat. Those are all realities, but the biggest reality is that you accepted the fact that that glass or flask of whiskey was there. The same thing is true when you are speaking in public. If an audience member doesn't understand what you just said, the reality is you didn't connect. You must find a way then to connect what you said to that individual member of the audience. Because if you lose just one person, you might have lost 100 people. And there's really no way to know. You might have figured it out from one person, and you need to use that clue in order to accept the reality that what you just fired out there missed. And so it's time to regroup, try again. So the pillars of improv are sort of this concept of yes and the other biggest one is this concept of following the follower. And so the idea is, I am following your clue right now as I speak to you, because I can't see the rest of the audience, but I can see your reactions, and I can adapt what I'm saying based on your facial expressions. And if, I see that what I just said didn't land very well, I can try again. And if it did land okay, I think that one landed all right.
I don't know. What's my bad landing face?
So that said, if you can follow the follower, you can lead to this third concept, which is that basically one must make their scene partner look good, right? Mm-hmm. So I talked a little bit earlier about this idea that communication is the co-creation of meaning between speaker and audience, right? If I say something and you as the audience don't understand what I said, we haven't co-created anything. Instead, you have left thinking, what was this guy doing, right? But if I can say something, read your facial expression or your nonverbal clues and connect what I just said and see that you understand, we have now come to a reality, right? You have understood what I've said. I have made it clear what my intention was. And we can both walk away knowing that what I said to you landed and that you understood, or at least as far as I can tell, you understood what I said. And so the idea of making one scene partner look good works this way with communicating science. Because if I'm out there talking about my particular science, and my work is in musculoskeletal biomechanics, that's what I would say before. And it would just land on deaf ears. Now what I say is, when someone asks me what I study, I say, well, I'm interested in how the shapes of bones and muscles influence how well they work and how they work. Not just how well, but whether they work. And I think that means a little bit more. And then I can expand on that. But that general first statement, right, isn't lost. Well, what is musculoskeletal biomechanics? Well, if I knew the answer to that, maybe I wouldn't be doing this, right?
Right.
But the
No,
fact
no,
that I
but I think
couldn't
you make
really
a good
define
point there.
this,
You're kind of doing that like where you're not just putting a term out there, you're describing it before you give them the term. So just like you were talking about earlier, you're giving that description so people understand where you're coming from. You're doing that more generalized definition so people know. And so you're doing that even within your title of who you are, not just when you're describing things of what it is you know are doing in a scientific paper, but you're incorporating that little simple concept into everything you do, so you're always including everyone and you're not losing anybody.
right, at least that's the idea. And so this point was really hammered home to me when I moved to Indiana University. Before that, I was at another institution, and my background is in functional anatomy and evolution. So I've got a background in evolutionary biology, a background in evolutionary anatomy, and I have a master's degree in biological anthropology. So I've always been interested in human fossils. My dissertation work was on monkey tails and how the form of the bone, how the shape of bone and muscle in the tail affects how whether or not some monkeys can suspend with their tails. And so, I was interested in how that works. And that was all about adaptation, right? And adaptation means one thing in that side. But then I moved here and I started working a little bit more on the biomedical side of things because I realized I could take my background in evolutionary anatomy and adaptation and try to understand adaptation in a shorter time period, not an evolutionary time any longer, but now over the course of a single lifetime or within a couple of months, right, developmentally. And so I started studying a disease called brittle bone disease, or Osteogenesis imperfecta. And that's a disease where collagen in the bone, which is a big part of bone, is not assembled properly. And so it leads to very weak bones, or what brittle bones, so they break quite a bit. And because it's a genetic disorder, it disproportionately affects children because they're born with it. And so, a mother or father watching their child learn to walk who has brittle bone disease had a very different experience, or has a very different experience watching their child learn to walk than I did when I was watching my children learn how to walk, because my children would fall down and we would laugh at them because we knew they were going to stand right back up, right? And they just looked like drunk undergraduate students, right? But a mother or father who is watching, their child with brittle bone disease is going to have a very different reaction. They're going to gasp, every time their child falls because they don't know whether they're going to fracture their bones when they fall. Children with OI, as it's called, can fracture hundreds of times in their lifetime, and they can fracture from sneezing if they have real severe forms, but they fracture quite a bit. And so I thought, if I could find a way to take differences in loading of a bone, which changes its shape. So if you exercise a bone, right, you can change its shape a little bit, and that will increase its strength. If I could find a way to take what I knew about how bone adapted evolutionarily and find a way to do that over a shorter time course, I might be able to affect that. All of this is getting at the point that when I talked about adaptation on the one hand, everyone over in the evolutionary world understood what I was talking about. When I talked about adaptation over on the biomedical side, they didn't think what I was doing was adaptation because they had a very different definition of what adaptation was. And here we are, even though at the root of it, it's the same problem, right? It's the same concept, but these two sciences couldn't speak to one another. So I would get back grant reviews. And they were like, well, I'm sure Dr. Organ's perfectly talented over in anthropology, but I don't see what he's doing, how what he's doing could ever be applied to this. And over here, they'd be like, well, that's all well and good, but, we're talking about monkey tails. And so, that's really not a huge funding priority, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was getting very difficult to find ways to fund science because these two general concepts, even though it's the same, right? It's the same terminology, meant different things to different fields. And so I thought, there's got to be a way that we can start communicating better amongst ourselves. And if once we get good at that, then we can start to get good at communicating with the public. And that's imperative because, again, most of us have federal funds, right? And so our research is funded by the taxpayers. And if we don't tell them what we're doing, that's not fair to them. It's really not fair to them. And we need to be out there telling them what we're doing. And once we do that, we can get them excited about what we do.
Yeah, you make a good point there of, especially with, it seems like the political climate right now, there definitely is a very big hesitancy by different agencies out there, different groups of holding on to those funds because they're so afraid that they're not going to have the funds to continue their projects and their studies in the future because they don't know if we're going to get. I know like a big thing up here in the Great Lakes is the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that we have, and so there's a big push by all the senators and the congressmen up here to be able to like keep those funds coming in because they know how important it is for the health of our Great Lakes and thus the economy. But the federal government might not necessarily understand that, and so we're really having to fight for that. And so we have to get better at communicating to be able to get everyone to understand why we need $300 million a year to be able to fund this one particular program. And if we can't communicate that and get the people who are going to make those decisions, not only folks in government, but also the folks supporting that and making those calls to their congressmen about it, that we're going to lose that funding, and all of a sudden you have all these scientists that are going to be out of jobs, all of these studies that are important to the health of our Great Lakes, to the economy, just going by the wayside, and then this whole region is just going to just dive bomb down and collapse, all because we weren't able to communicate the importance of this one particular program. And so you have experiences probably with that, with trying to seek funds and making that so important, and make that important to not only to the people who are reading those grants and saying, okay, should we do this, but also to folks around who will be influencing those people making those decisions. So have you found that there is more of that turn of maybe those older PIs, those older scientists understanding like the importance of science communication when it comes to this particular aspect, that they're now like getting it? Oh, we need to be able to learn how to communicate because of these issues with funding and with educating the public, so we continue to have those funds, so we can continue to have jobs and continue to do the science that's so needed to move our society forward.
Yes. So at the very beginning of the podcast, I mentioned that the reason I got involved with the communicating science graduate minor and the work going on here at IU was because of the election. That's mostly true, but I had been involved in science outreach ever since I was an undergraduate student. Actually, I remember back in kindergarten, my dad was a physician, and he brought a skeleton to my kindergarten class, and so immediately I understood the importance of science outreach, right? That said, I've always done events where we can bring science to the public, just because I always found it really rewarding to me, because I like to see individuals, especially children, get excited about science. And one of the things that really engaged me was I grew up in Overland Park, Kansas, and it's right there in the middle of limestone country. And the front facade of our house had an ammonite fossil in the limestone right underneath the house number. And so every day when I come home from school, I would look at that fossil, and it just fascinated me. Science was always something that was interesting to me. So I have always been involved in these outreach programs. We have our department here at IU, the Anatomy and Cell Biology department, is active every year in this festival called Celebrate Science Indiana, which is a giant statewide festival held at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. It's really a great event, and we have never really got buy-in from senior people in the department, aside from the really important players like my chair and that sort of stuff, and the vice chair for education, that sort of thing. This year, that changed a little bit. I had a senior PI in my department take me aside after we had done this event and say, you know what, I've been giving you kind of trouble about this over the last couple of years, but I finally get it. And so I think finally we're landing on friendlier ears within the science community here at IU. I mean, this has always been a welcoming place for this kind of stuff, but within individual departments, there are individuals who just don't get it or don't want to get it. I think that is changing. And I think it's changing because people see what's happening in the wake of the 2016 election. At least I hope that's why. Because if that's not a good enough reason, then I'm not sure what will reach them.
Yeah, then you have like no clue of like, what is it going to take, everybody? Come on.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, if this isn't open eyes, yeah, it definitely would be very scary to think of what it would make them really engage with Scicomm and understand what they're missing by not being, a part of this or helping to support it, with things. Yeah, because I know with myself, I mean, that's part of what helped inspired Scicomm Monday was the fact that we were seeing this real lack of science knowledge out there, in these, various non-science audiences, and how much it really did drop off. Like we thought it was there, but I think now we're really truly realizing, the lack of knowledge base in everyone, and trying to find different ways that we can reach people and get them educated about science. We're trying to do everything we can. And I know for me, this keeps driving me to do this every week, and hopefully it will, inspire other people to do similar things like Scicomm Monday. So,
do you mind if I turn the tables for a second?
No, go ahead.
How what you do is received by your colleagues? I mean, do you find support, or do you find that it's difficult?
No, I think everyone I've engaged with seems to really appreciate it, but I also have a very big group of Scicommers that I am constantly engaging with. So it could be just that nice echo chamber of everyone who likes to do Scicomm loves Scicomm Monday, because it's, they're already into Scicomm, versus, anyone outside of that. It's you can only talk to so many people, and I find the people I usually talk to most of the times are people who are already engaged in science communication. And there does need to be more of that. I know I did a workshop at a conference in October, and it was very interesting to do that. It was the first time I've done a workshop or a seminar on science communication, and actually get to spend most of the time talking about how to be better Scicommers, versus it seems like I usually would spend half of my time at these things talking to people as why they should be doing Scicomm, like convincing them to do it. So this was nice. This was like a nice turn of the tables, and it was older PIs, in their 50s and 60s, who were so happy and like just excited about it, and asking so many questions. I was like, wait, this isn't usually how it goes. This is great. I'm loving this. So, I mean, maybe that could have just been a one-off, or maybe people are actually starting to get it and understand and buying into science communication. We can hope.
I think that's true. I mean, that's my general sense. I mean, looking at, the Science March in April, and what sort of interest that generated, and how that has translated in several places into ongoing programming. Like, for example, we had a March for Science here in Indianapolis. I actually was at the experimental biology meeting running a science communication workshop during the March for Science. So I was unable to participate here or in Chicago, where the meeting was. But in the wake of the March for Science here in Indianapolis, there was a joint venture between the Science March Indy and the Indiana Humanities Council. I think that's what it's officially called. And the Indiana State Museum, and a couple of other things, like the Central Indiana Science Outreach Initiative. And they put together a science communication, or I guess a science-themed book club that meets every month at a distillery that is science-themed, called the Broken Beaker, which is great. And they bring in scientists to be the expert commenters on a book that was read by the group. And that kind of sustained interest in science is paying off, I think will pay off, because science communication is becoming a more visible sort of avenue for scientists to engage in, but also for the public to finally engage with scientists, because the vast majority of the public have never spoken to a scientist, and breaking down that barrier, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I like that idea of doing that, like in-person kind of book club. I know there's a social media one, hashtag BioLit Club, that is out on Twitter right now. And they do a good job of engaging everyone on social media, run by Tiana Burke and Jordan Rudder, two former grad students, and they do a really good job with that. But I also really like doing it in person, where you can communicate. Because half the time of why we do all this is a way that we can talk back and forth with each other. We use this social media to be able to engage with each other in person. And so I really like that fun aspect of getting together, at a actual location, having a few beers, because I do love my craft beers, and just chatting about it, and having that expert there to kind of guide you as you're going through that book. I think that's something that could be successful at other locations as well. I mean, I know I would attend that if I had one, in my hometown, or, wherever it is that I'm going to be at. It's definitely would be fun to go do those kind of things.
I agree. Totally agree.
Have you heard of any other programs kind of like those that, people are trying to do, where it's more of that, like, maybe smaller group in-person science communication outreach that they're trying to do to, get the public to come in and learn about science in those fun ways?
Sure. So there are several programs that I know of. There's an international festival called Pint of Science that is held every year on 3 consecutive dates in pubs throughout the world, and they bring scientists in to give public outreach talks on their science. In America, I believe that that's changed. I think in the U.S. it's now called the Taste of Science. So I think they have split off from the international one. And they do similar sorts of things. And so we have an active group here in Indianapolis, but there are groups in Chicago and I think Los Angeles, maybe Houston, but there's a website for that. They're all over the place. And again, there are 3 consecutive nights throughout the same city. And usually 1 or 2 talks per night. Maybe if there are multiple venues, then maybe more, but at one venue, 1 or 2 talks. And it's a really good way for the public to engage with scientists who are there to just kind of have a good time talking about what they do.
Yeah,
but there are other programs too, right? I mean, like public libraries always have an interest in having scientists come and talk. So I have a colleague here who runs the PLOS blog with me, who every year during Halloween gives a talk on the science behind the monsters of Halloween. So, what is a vampire, right? Or where does the legend of a werewolf come from? And that has to do with like hallucinations and eating bread that has fungus in it or something like that. I've heard it before. It didn't land particularly well on me, but it should have landed better. But it didn't. So I guess I'm gonna have to refresh on that one. But there are ways to get involved, and so libraries, programs that are out there, just sort of Google science communication. You'll find venues.
Yeah, I definitely am really excited to hear about like those different aspects where it doesn't. I mean, as much as I love social media, I think sometimes we kind of use it as a crutch when it comes to Scicomm, of just saying, oh, well, we're just going to tweet it. Well, usually our audiences on Twitter and other things are going to be those biased audiences. It's going to be that echo chamber. So doing these, outreach things where it's more in person, I think you're more likely, hopefully, I mean, I could be wrong, if anyone's got any data out there actually analyzing this would be great, that you're more likely, I think, to get those general science audiences to come in and be engaged with that. So why don't you tell us a little bit, about what you're hoping to grow this program into? Are you just trying to, you're going to run it for a while as that minor, or are you hoping to maybe like grow this into more of like an actual full-fledged graduate, major program of where you're actually going to like develop folks who are able to leave that and, maybe do something like this, or, be the next, voice of Science Friday on NPR,
Right.
Where are you hoping to take this to? What's the lofty dreams?
That's a good question, and I can't speak for my collaborators here because we haven't discussed too much of the end result, other than we want to create a program here right now that gives students another avenue if academia doesn't work out, right? Because there's a real need for communicators of science, and the best people to do that are ones who can understand the science and bring, science to the public directly. So we're trying to create an avenue for students who are not interested in going down the academic route, because jobs in academia are fewer and fewer and farther between than they ever have been, right? Especially tenure track positions. And so right now the idea is that we want to give another avenue of employment option, right? But ultimately, what I would really like to do is to build this into a program where we are teaching, we are training science communicators, in a graduate major, a PhD in science communication, because those programs do exist a little bit more than graduate minors do, but again, there still aren't a whole lot of them. And one of the things that we do really well here at Indiana University is teach medical educators. We train medical educators, especially in the anatomical sciences. We have an entire PhD program just devoted to training future anatomy professors.
Wow.
We can leverage that approach to train future science communicators who will have PhD credentials and not have to buck the system and find their way on their own. And so ultimately, I think, if we could have a PhD program, that would be phenomenal. I don't see that happening anytime in the next few years. Instead, what I see happening is the continuation of growing our program, because if we can grow our minor, then it's a much easier step to a major than it is if we can't grow that minor.
Have you had any feedback from the students? How much they're liking the program? Are they all gangbusters in it? The ones who have signed up, or are they finding it that it's actually helping them? Have you gotten that where it's like, oh, this made this conference that much better, or I've been better able to communicate with my family or friends, or anything along those lines?
Absolutely. So we were just sitting down today to work on final grades for this past semester, and we were reading through. We had them do some writing, self-reflecting pieces that about where they started and where they ended up this semester. So we asked them before the course started. We asked them, or I think the first week of the course, we asked them to record a 1-minute video explaining their science and upload it to our internal website. And then we asked them to do it again, a 5-minute video at the end of the semester. And you can see growth, amazing growth from week 1 to the last week of the semester. And so, in reading their reflective pieces, it's clear that they're all using this new approach to thinking about their science, to using metaphors to explain what they're doing, and it's ultimately making them more effective. So we had a couple of students participate in a 3-minute thesis competition on campus, and one of them, I think, finished in 2nd place, which was really fantastic, especially considering that at the beginning of the semester she was very hesitant. Didn't quite know what she was getting into, and was nervous about it, right? Because we took everybody outside of their comfort zone. We start off by playing improv games, right? Things where we make people learn how to dynamically listen to one another. So we play this game called Counting in Pairs. In fact, do you want to do this real quick?
Sure. Yeah, I'm totally game for this.
So here's what happens. This is called Counting in Pairs. The idea is that you have to listen to what I'm saying. I have to listen to what you're saying. And there's a very familiar pattern, right? We're going to count to 3, and we're going to keep counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, alternating. Okay, so I'll start 1. You'll say 3. 1, 2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3.
Not hard to do, right? Except that you have to anticipate the fact that it's changing patterns a little bit, right?
Yeah, it does. It throws you off just that little bit.
Right. What happens instead of saying 2, we clap, okay?
Oh my goodness.
So why don't you start? Okay.
Okay, 1, 3.
1, 3.
1, 3.
1, 3. See, a lot more difficult, right?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
And the idea here is that you are having to listen to what I'm saying in order to adapt what you're saying, right? And so instead of focusing inward, because when we first started doing it, we were just counting with numbers, and you were just thinking, what's the next number I'm going to be saying, right?
Right.
Instead of, what is he about to say, right? And so the idea is that you have to turn your attention outward instead of focusing inward. We start off the semester by doing these kinds of exercises, and the students, they freak out because they're out of their comfort zone and they don't know what they're doing, right?
Yeah, because I totally felt like I was tapping my head and rubbing my belly, and it was just that awkwardness of I know this isn't going to work right, but once I can get it down, I'm fine. But it's so awkward when you first start doing it.
Exactly, and so we do a whole series of these kinds of exercises, and then we move on to the next stage, which is really learning how to distill your message. So we do this exercise where we ask people to talk about their science for a minute, then for or 2 minutes, then a minute, then 30 seconds, then 15 seconds, right? And the take-home message here is that 15-second soundbite, that 15 seconds is the usual length of a soundbite on a media interview. And so if you can get your salient point across in 15 seconds, everything else you did for 2 minutes was probably not essential to your story, right? And so learning how to dynamically listen to your audience, to reframe your message, distill it down, and then we work on how to work in real time with an audience, whether that be in media interviews or whether that be with a public speaking engagement or whether that be through writing. That's sort of how we take those principles and we apply them to those particular outlets.
Yeah, because it sounds like you're giving them that skill set that you don't necessarily realize that you need because you think it's just going to come naturally and easy, but it actually is very difficult. Like I've seen people give interviews of where they're just straight laced and they're talking about something that's making them happy, but it's just they're so not showing it because they're so nervous with being on camera. And I know like how you were saying with the difference between at the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester with those on camera. I could only imagine if I was to go look back at my very first couple of episodes of Scicomm Monday and compare it to now, I probably would just be shaking my head in embarrassment at how bad those first ones are, compared to now, because like there's so many like little tips and tricks that I picked up just by doing it, where I never would have realized, at that time when I jumped into it, because I wouldn't have had that experience to tell me, oh, I need to do this. Like, something as simple as, ever so often remind everyone who it is I'm talking to and ways that you can engage with us, things like that,
Sure.
until you're in the middle of doing it, you never think of it. But now it just becomes common practice and you're comfortable with doing it.
Right, exactly. So it's about getting outside of your comfort zone so you can develop a new comfort zone, right?
Right.
And that's really what we're trying to teach. And so we culminated our experience with our students this semester by having them give 5-minute presentations at a high school. So they had to take what they do and distill that message for a high school audience, and they had 5 minutes to talk about it. So they had to decide what was the one take-home message they wanted the students to know. And it was amazing to watch them go from not accomplishing anything in 5 minutes at the beginning of the semester to getting across a really good point with the use of storytelling and metaphor, and enabling them to engage with their audience and get responses in real time and then adapt to those responses in real time. It was really amazing to watch. So my guess is, if I can do it, if they can do it, anyone can do it. We can teach these to everyone with these techniques. The problem is, everyone needs to learn them, because we can all get better at communicating. None of us are perfect.
Yeah, it's all good points there for sure. And as we're running out of time here, I just want to give you a last minute chance to give any advice or any helpful comments to anyone out there listening who wants to be better at their science communication. What's the big piece of advice that you would tell them to do?
I have two. One, practice engaging an audience. So use metaphors, tell stories, engage your audience in a way that will leave them wanting to ask questions, and try to do that without using jargon. My other piece of advice is to practice your writing. Aaron Carroll, who happens to be here at Indiana University too, he's a columnist for the New York Times. He writes a blog, I think, called The Incidental Economist. Gave an interview to our Scicomm Plus blog not too long ago because he had a new book come out, I think just a couple of months ago. And his biggest piece of advice, which I think is fantastic advice, is that practice learning how to write 800 words every day. Just learn how to do that. And once you get good at doing that, then you can write 800 words that are meaningful for someone else, right? Get good at writing first, practice. And then once you get good at actually writing, get better at writing for a non-specialist audience. And you can do that by several ways. Imagine you need to explain what you do to your grandma at Thanksgiving, or Christmas, right? Or Hanukkah. That's a good way to approach it. Finally, I would just plug the blog. If you have an idea that you want to write about, please get in touch with us. You can reach us at scicommplus@gmail.com, or you can find us at blogs.plus.org /SciCommPlus. Get in touch with us. If you have an idea you want to pitch to us to write for the public, we are all ears, and we are happy to help you get that piece into shape for the public.
Yeah, no, that's some great ideas, and it's always fun to be able to see like if you can get more people engaged with the blogs. Because once you find a good blog, it's always fun to read.
Agreed.
So I want to give a big thank you to Dr. Jason Organ from Indiana University for being on today. It was definitely a real pleasure to have you, Jason.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk about this, and thank you for the invitation.
Yep. And hopefully as that program continues to go, maybe we can have you back on in the future so we could talk about, how those students are doing a couple of years down the road and find out, how well they got through the program and what amazing things they're able to do by having those experiences with the program.
I would love that.
Great. Well, if you're watching this on replay or you just were too shy to get your questions in, feel free to contact Jason. You can reach him at OregonJM on Twitter. And if you have any questions for myself or for the broadcast, you can either tweet me at Scicomm Monday or at Wildlife BioGal. Just a reminder, we are going to be off next week because of the holidays here in the U.S., so we won't be back on into 2018. So tune in for upcoming guests, and we'll get that information out to you all. But it definitely has been a very fun 2017, and we really enjoyed doing Scicomm Monday, and I thank everyone for tuning in. I want to give a special thank you, shout out to all of our Patreon sponsors. We really appreciate all the help that you guys give with bringing this broadcast to the audience every week. And a big special additional shout out to Jason Leathers. He goes by I for MSU on Twitter. He's one of our major Patreon sponsors, and we definitely really appreciate all the help he's been giving us. And if you like the broadcast and you want to see it keep going, please go to our Patreon page and help us out. It's a really great way to help support things like Scicomm Monday. There's also a whole bunch of other Scicommers out there that have a Patreon account, so please feel free to go and peruse theirs and see how you can help us get this science out to all of these audiences. And if you're a scientist or a science communicator and you're interested in being on Scicomm Monday, come join the growing list of people who have been on. We cater to all STEM disciplines. We're not just ecology, of where I love, to, talk, but I love talking about all the different disciplines out there. And then if you're just, someone who's more purely of a science communicator, not necessarily a scientist, come on and talk about it too, because we want to cover it all. Anything that falls under the science communication banner, we're all game with. So DM us at the Scicomm Monday account, and we'll figure out how to get you on the program. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. Go explore, do some science, have some fun, and we'll see you on the next Scicomm Monday.